What's up everybody, Unrested back again, and I'm getting an awesome response on my ramble videos, especially anyone that concerns some sort of story from my life, and I'm going to go ahead and just let you know this is part 2 of my first week in Japan video. This is obviously going to cover the next couple of weeks. I'm not going to go back over anything in the first week. I pretty much covered just about everything that happened to me in that first week that I got into Japan. And I will continue on from there into more that developed. It was really kind of a wacky first month in general. Wacky because when I started with Nova in Akaiwa, which is an English conversation school, and a company in which you do, well, for my division, we did webcam teaching. It was a really strange situation. And it was strange because they hired a mass amount of teachers. They constantly had to keep about 600 teachers in that building to teach all these lessons all over Japan via webcam, because we were teaching to like areas that were just so rural that there's no way there'd be a school out there. So they had to buy this giant webcam device that allowed them to have the lessons with Nova, which it was outrageously expensive, by the way. And later it was also found out that Saruhashi, the evil CEO running the company of Nova, was running a secondary company that was making that webcam and selling it back to his other owned company and making a profit by selling to himself. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I don't know the logistics of how to do things like that. But it was later turned out that that's like insanely evil to do. Like you don't do stuff like that. Like make a product with two different companies and sell to the other company to make profit for yourself and come away with a huge amount of profit. Something about that was really looked down upon in Japan. I don't know if there's some sort of legal business desire to stop that, or it's some sort of really immoral practice. I don't understand the logistics, but like I said, it was really like that was one of the other things they put up there with him cheating students out of their last couple lessons when the company went bankrupt and leaving Gaijin on the street for not paying their rent. They also were like, and he had his own company that he was selling to himself. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's bad. All right. Anyway, so we used these webcams. They were the most awful webcams too. They were literally like the size of a cable box, like an old cable box, or a what would you call that thing? A descrambler. An old giant descrambler, like almost like the size of like an Xbox. And they had a webcam in them, and the webcam was just like awful quality. Like, I mean, it was like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 megapixels it looked like. I mean, you were just this like pixelated blob on the screen. And just the overall technology was like the equivalent to like doing a lesson with like the first edition of PowerPoint. So even the technology, the software, the hardware, and everything behind it that these people had to pay a ton to use, by the way. I mean, I think they had to like rent the machine for like $1,000 for the initial installation in your house, and you had to pay like extra money each month to have that machine in there. It was outrageous. So they did this, and we were teaching these lessons, and it wasn't really too bad. The worst part about these lessons is, first of all, you have 4 levels. You have A, B, C, D, and then the A was the people who could barely speak any English at all. Like, I mean, literally, like they could say hello, like that's about it. Like they'd be like, hello, my name is Hikari, and you'd be like, okay, hello Hikari, like, and that's about all they would have understood of you. If you wanted to continue to talk to them after that, you'd have to be like, Hikari, look at this picture. Like, you'd have to go really slow. And they would maybe not even understand that. So you're talking level A. That was the super beginner level, like barely understood, like kindergarten level English in Japan. A kindergartner in America would probably be almost like a level C. So you had like B, which was like they were finally starting to understand like short directions and stuff. Like maybe they could tell a cab where they wanted to go, or they could go shopping in a store with a lot of the same language, like I would like this, I would like to try on this, and stuff like that. C, moving up to a pretty decent speaker. You could actually have some conversations with them. You could expand on subjects. And then D was like, they were pretty advanced. Like you had a lesson plan that you were supposed to follow for every lesson, like a general topic, but really at D, they were usually so good at speaking English that you could just, briefly touch on a few points and actually have a conversation. And it was usually a pretty interesting lesson. It was pretty fun. But the only people I found who were usually that high enough level were Obachans, which is like old ladies who had pretty much spent their whole life either studying English or had been housewives and spent a good deal of their money and time taking Eikaiwa lessons each and every day up until the point of level D. And they were good. They were fun to talk to. They had really interesting insight. I remember there was one student I had, and she said, like I said, I always ask people why they study English, and she said, I studied English because Japanese doesn't let me be like as expressive or strong with my language as I want to be, and so I learned another language that lets me be really strong, and I guess she felt like English really let her do that. And that was a really interesting aspect of those lessons. Moving on from there, let me go ahead and just get my seat in the park here so I can get comfortable and continue to talk to you. So we had those different levels to teach to. And I remember, I'll just give you a few examples of some of my few lessons. Like, I used to really have fun with them. I used to try and make them as fun as I could. That's my big thing, is I feel like if students are having fun, then they're learning. And I don't care what age it is, I always want them to have fun. So even when I'd have like really simple, boring lessons, like I said, like some were giving directions or shopping. So if I was doing the giving directions lesson, it usually was like cab, like taking a cab or a taxi in another country. So you'd be like, you get into the taxi, you need to tell the taxi driver to turn left and get to the movie theater. And like you could follow, like you had this dialogue to read and everything in the book. And I would do that, like I'd follow their lessons, because you had to stick to their lessons. If you didn't, you could get in trouble. The thing was like there was only like 20 to 25 lessons for each level, so you eventually ended up repeating these lessons, I mean like hundreds of times. So I've done the cab lesson like, 50 times by the end of the first week. If you have eight students a day, and you work 5 to 6 days a week, and you have every single student be an A, how many times have you done that same lesson possibly? Like if that's the only lesson that they haven't done, you try to check and see which one they haven't done or which one they've done the least, because they do repeat lessons, and then you end up doing that again. So I would try to make it as interesting possible. When I'd put them in the cab lesson doing directions, I would act like this crazy cab driver. First of all, I would take my computer chair and I would turn it around so like they would be facing me from the back, and like I'd be like leaning back like, hey, where do you want to go? Where do you headed to? And they'd be like, well, what's going on? I'm like a real taxi driver. I would turn around to talk to you, and they're like, oh, okay, makes sense. So then I would pretend to like drive. I'd have my arms up like, we're driving now, and so they'd start to really get into it. They'd start to get this feel. I'd make the sound the whole time. Or if I had a sound effect that I could play, because sometimes you had access to a library, I'd start to play like a motor sound effect, depending whether or not the computer was working right for the day, because its software had a lot of bugs in it. And we would go ahead and begin the lesson. I would start it off really easy, like, what should I do next? And they'd be like, turn left, please. And I'd be like, okay. And then like I'd start to squeal the tires. They'd be like, and I'd be like, okay, I just took that turn really fast. What do you tell the driver? And they'd be like, oh, can you slow down? And I'd be like, oh, okay, good. And then like I'd get crazier and crazier and go faster and faster until it became like this chase. Like the police were after me, and they're in the car with me, and they're trying to talk me down from driving too fast. And then eventually it would climax with I'm trying to escape the police, and the bridge is like going up because a boat is passing underneath, and I would be about to hit the ramp, and I'd ask them like, should I hit the gas as fast as I can and make it through, or should I just give up and let the police take me? And I would say almost 100% of the time they would want me to hit the gas and jump the bridge. So that's how I would handle that lesson. It would always climax to that point. I wouldn't just be like, okay, I drop you off at the train station and you say goodbye to the cab driver. It was a little bit of role playing and stuff like that. So. And my other one was the shopping lesson. Instead of just being like, oh, you walk into a clothing store, would you like to try on a red sweater or a blue sweater? Like, you could do it that boring if you wanted to. That was the dialogue in there. We would start out shopping normal. What I would do is pretend to be customer service, helping them out, choosing some stuff that fits them and stuff. So you'd start out by just going through normal language of, oh, I'd like size small, or I'd like size medium or large, or You know, do you have pants in this color and stuff like that? But then we'd get to a point where a robber would come into the store, and be holding up the store with a gun. And I'd be like, oh my God, someone's in here holding up the store with a gun. What do you do? And they'd be like, oh my God, like suddenly you'd see the surprise in their eyes, like kind of like, what the fuck are you doing? But at the same time, like, oh, finally, something new in this lesson. Like you could, because some of them have done this lesson like 8, 10, 20, 15, you know, 30 times. And so I'd throw this in there, and you know, this would just be like a total needle off the record, like, what? Like they would be like, oh my God, I don't know. I start to take out my purse and maybe give him the money. And I'm like, all right, he puts a gun to your face and stuff. Or like, you know, I'd get really intense. Depending, you know, I would gauge it. Like, usually like, you know, some of the younger students I had would like to get into this action type stuff. The older people would start to be like, oh, I use my cell phone to secretly dial the police. And I'd be like, the police come and you're considered a hero and everything. So, you know, I'd always let them win it out. But it would be really interesting to see the decision they would make. The only thing that would really suck is a couple students that you would get would be the worst students ever. And here's the type that you would get that'd be the worst type of students ever. First of all, there were students who were forced to take the lessons. And you probably wonder, like, how could you possibly be forced to get on camera and take a lesson? Well, there's multiple reasons. Number one, there is parents who ask their teenagers and, you know, students at school to take these lessons. They sign them up for these Kiowa lessons, and they have to take them after school. They are not happy to take those lessons. They hate these lessons. And yeah, I had one kid, I remember, he just wasn't paying attention the whole lesson. And I didn't, like, you know, I didn't get angry or anything like that. I could tell he was just forced to take these. So I'd just be like, okay, let's do this next. And like, he'd just be like, I'd be like, all right, I'm just gonna read this to you. And then he'd be like, can I go get a tissue? And I'd be like, yeah, go ahead. And he just, like, because it was a webcam, I can't, like, go find him and get him if he leaves his camera. So he'd, like, go get a tissue and leave for, like, 20 minutes, come back, like, the lesson's almost over. And he'd be like, sorry about that. I'd be like, nah, it's okay, don't worry about it. Like, you know, what can I do? I can't be like, no, don't go get a tissue, don't go blow your nose. Or, like, maybe the kid's sick for real or something. Like, you can't scream or yell at him. You just be like, all right, yeah, no problem, whatever, okay. You know, I'm still getting paid whether he stays in front of the camera or not, so whatever. And then you'd have... usually it would be businessmen. Usually businesswomen didn't care so much. Businesswomen, probably in general, I'd have to say young women and older women who took English lessons were the easiest to teach because they weren't afraid to make mistakes. And I'm not saying that men are like this and women are like this everywhere in Japan, but in general, I found older men who had high-level careers like engineers and doctors, the first time that they would make a mistake in English, they would just lock up. They would just not talk anymore. They were like embarrassed or something that they had already made a mistake, and they would like refuse to talk anymore. And if someone makes a mistake, I don't ever yell at them. I'm never like, no, wrong. I'm always like, oh, good. Just change it a little bit like this. So like, you know, they'd be like, I am disappoint, and I'd be like, oh, good, yeah, disappoint. That's a great word to use. But I am disappoint. That's all you would change it to. Like, that's how I would correct somebody, not, you know, be super condescending, like, no, you idiot, it's not I am disappoint. You know, like, I wouldn't yell at them that they were like some kind of like soulless syntax error robot or something. I would, you know, first of all, do the nice, bad, nice sandwich, where I'd be like, okay, good job, you tried to answer the question, that's what matters. Okay, number 2, here's how you can correct it a little bit, you know, and change it around. And number 3, good job though, I'm really glad you tried. Like, that's how I'd always try to like give people motivation to continue while correcting them. I would never try to shout people down or be like, you idiot, because a lot of these times I gotta remind you that when I'm teaching these lessons, a lot of them tended to be 4-person lessons. Myself and 3 other students. I guess that'd be a 3-person lesson really. And so if they got, you know, I don't want to say scolded. I don't think well, some teachers did scold. Some teachers were really mean. If they ever got corrected, they would be sometimes corrected in front of 2 other students. And I noticed most of the women would just laugh it off. Like, they'd just be like, oh, my bad, okay, whatever. But then, like, men would just be like, oh, I can't believe this, you have corrected me in front of these. I cannot speak anymore to someone like you. You're just here to embarrass me. And I'd just be like, oh my god, man, are you serious? Like, what's the point of you paying for this lesson? And like, you know, sometimes these would be people paying for that lesson, and they would clam up, and I'd be like, what are you paying for, man, if you're not going to talk? Like, the only way you're going to get better is if you talk. So that was annoying to deal with. And like I said, you had some people who were forced to take the lessons. Like you had some people whose companies like signed them up for these lessons, and they were not happy to be there. I mean, and I can understand that. Imagine you work an 8 to 12-hour day, because remember it's Japan, and then you come home and the first thing you have to do is take a 1-hour English lesson. Screw that, man. Right? Like, if I had to work for 12 hours straight, although I guess today's Monday and I'm gonna go ahead and um, do 8 to 12 hours of work and go home and take a Japanese lesson. So, well, anyway, it's my choice though. My company didn't sign me up to do it, so there we go. That's the difference. That's the difference. Um, yeah, they weren't too stoked. They weren't really too happy to be taking that lesson, so they weren't too motivated. I had some wacky students, and I had some other friends who were teachers who had some wacky situations with students. In general, you had to keep your talking with the students very professional. You had to keep it. You couldn't ask for things like you couldn't. I remember there were some rules like you couldn't ask for, of course, phone numbers. That would be weird. You couldn't ask for emails. If they asked you for your phone number or your email, you couldn't send them anything like that. You couldn't tell them anything in Japanese. So if they didn't know a word in English, you just had to explain it with more simple English words. You were never supposed to talk Japanese. Now, sometimes, that's the only rule I would break a little bit. Sometimes I would never say anything in Japanese, but I'd just be like, look, it's this. And I would type out the Japanese word in Romaji on the screen, and then they could just read it. Because I'd be like, come on, man. Try to explain the word fix in simple English, fix. So it's broken, and they're like, well, what's broken? I'm like, the opposite of fix. Okay. Okay, so it's, you put it together because you want it back to the way it was before it was broken. You don't know the word broken. Okay, so look, you get yourself into a situation like that, and you're like, okay, can I just tell you, like, kowareshita, or naoshite, like fix, and you would eventually end up just typing the word, and they'd be like, oh, okay, like, instead of wasting 10 minutes of lesson time trying to explain one word, you type the Romaji of the Japanese, and you could easily move on to more lessons. It worked out better that way. So, but those two rules I was talking about earlier, you can't give away your own information like email and phone number, and I never did. I never broke that rule. I always did feel like that would be very unprofessional to do. But I did know one girl there who worked, she was from New Zealand, and it was some famous Japanese rugby player took her lesson. And it's just random. They don't get to choose who they get. And a lot of times when blonde girls there would get lessons with Japanese guys, sometimes they would try to get fresh with them on camera. And for the most part, of course, the girls were like, fuck you, you don't talk to me like this, or like, they had the option of just turning off the lesson if the person got too fresh, or they had the option of just like, disconnecting the call if the person was too crazy. You can do that. Like if a person starts to get verbally abusive with you or anything, you can disconnect it. But I mean, for the most part, I think those girls would stand their ground. I mean, and this was super rare, but I mean, you are talking 600 teachers, so once in a while this did occur. I mean, this is the absolute, most rare thing to happen, but it does happen because you had so many teachers and so many, we literally had thousands and thousands of students. Like every teacher had 8 lessons a day, and usually that was always a different student. So I mean, you can imagine 7 days a week, 600, times 7 times 8, it adds up to a lot. Multiplies up to a lot. It has a big sum. I'm not good at math. Does it show? So you eventually had this happen. I'm just trying to say it was rare, but it did happen. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make. So this happened to this one girl, but she really liked him. She was like, man, this guy is, he's built, he's sexy, he's handsome, he's smart, he's got a great job. I guess he wasn't like overly fresh. He was just kind of like, so we had a good lesson, like, can we hang out? And she gave him his phone number and stuff, and they actually went on a few dates and stuff. So she kind of broke that rule, but I think she was very happy she did. I don't know what their situation turned out as. I don't know how long they dated or anything, because the company went bankrupt soon after, so I didn't get to follow a lot of these stories, unfortunately. But I had something similar happen to me. I had a lesson, and the lesson subject, I did not choose the subject, was housewives in Japan. And it was a group lesson, I remember, and it was all women who took that lesson. And it just happened to be, it just, like I said, it's a random selection of students. Usually they all have to be the same level, and that's it. And then it'll team them up and choose them and put them together in the same lesson. And that's what I did, to put them together. It was all women, and I had questions to ask them. Like, I literally had a list of questions to ask them. And I remember that lesson was good enough that I really didn't have to kind of create my own stuff. It had really intriguing questions like, what do you think a housewife does in Japan? Do you think other countries have housewives? If you do, what do you think they do in theirs? And I'd always love to hear their answers. I mean, it was really interesting for me to hear what they imagine housewives in other countries do, or if they had things similar to housewives in other countries, or if they themselves were a housewife and what their life was like, if they were a hardcore career woman and hated anything having to do with being a housewife. And then it had the question of, would you be, if you were a man, and I was the only man in the lesson, of course, I was a teacher. If you're a man, would you be a house husband? And they had never heard that question before. They're like, wow, that's a really good question. They're like, what about you, Scott Sensei? Would you be a house husband? I was like, yeah, I'd be a house husband in a second, man. I was like, stay home and just take care of the kids and clean the house. I'm like, I love to clean. And I do, it's true, I love to clean. So if I was just at home cleaning my own house every day, yeah, sure. And the one girl stopped and was like, well, you could be my house husband. Like, she didn't even care that the other students that were there were like, listening to the whole lesson and everything. And she just stopped and like, she's like, I make good money. You could be my house husband. You could come live with me. And I was like, oh, thanks for the invitation. I'll think about it. And like, luckily, like there was only like 5 minutes left on the lesson and it ended out. But like, I mean, she was ready to give me her email and everything and her phone number over that. And I was just like, whoa, 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 whoa. That was pretty direct, pretty brave girl there to do that over the lesson. Not that I have any problem with that. She has every right to do that. I think she wanted just to express her feelings in the moment. Hilarious. But it did, it made for an interesting story that I just told you right now. So that's just an example of what some of my first few weeks of students and stuff were like. There was a few students that were like kind of famous. There were some who were known for showing up insanely drunk. Because you got to remember, sometimes these lessons, we worked 24 hours there. Like, I mean, our shifts weren't 24 hours, but it was open 24 hours. You could work a shift, which I eventually did. I switched to night shift, which was 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. And the reason I did switch to that was because it paid really good. It paid $3,000 a month. I think, no, $3,300 a month. So that was pretty decent money for just getting to Japan. No one wanted to work that shift. We were a very, very small skeleton crew. And it was awesome. I made a lot of my friends there. Unfortunately, most of who have left Japan because that company went bankrupt, as I've said many times. But you got some wacky situations there. You got the drunk students who were so wasted that they'd fall asleep in the middle of their lessons. Or, they'd go out and party all night and then they'd have a lesson at like 3 a.m. and like they'd be just so wasted. Like, they're like, I just speak English. Or they'd be like, really, they'd tell you like really personal stuff because, they were so wasted. Like, there was this one girl and she was infamous for coming on super wasted in the middle of a group lesson where everyone else was sober, so it'd make it like really comfortable. And so like she would always like really speak her mind on strong issues about Japan. Like, so you'd have stuff would be like, do you think women get unequal pay at jobs currently in Japan? And she'd be like, fuck yeah they do, fuck you man, and everything. Like, she's just like, I mean, and she's right. She's every bit right. There is a more tactful way to go about the argument, but she would just be like, fucking damn straight. Blah. And like, the men in the room would be like, oh my goodness. Because I mean, like in Japanese society, it's kind of odd to show up and do something like this. It's okay to be drunk at the right times, but to show up to like a professional lesson and like shouting your opinion strongly, whether you be drunk or sober, is not always really well accepted. So she was different. Let's put it that way. She was a brave drunk. Let's put it that way. And then we had this one girl. She wasn't a girl, I should say. She was an old lady, and her name was Noriko. I remember. And they used to call her the floating head, Noriko, the floating head of death, because I don't know why, but she had her lessons with a black background and she'd wear a turtleneck that was solid black. And so she'd always look like this floating head on camera because it wouldn't have any kind of like different light proportion around her body. And so she just looked like this floating head, and her English was super bad. Like she never got above level A English, but she had been taking the lessons for so long that people started to vote her up through the different levels, because teachers actually made the decision if they could go up a new level, the student could go up a new level, you'd put in enough votes, and if enough teachers voted that they got to go up, they eventually would. So I guess eventually if you have enough teachers who feel sorry for you, you eventually get promoted no matter how bad you are. And so she had made it to level like C, but she was still like level A, like she could still be like, hello, I am Noriko. Like that's all she could pretty much say for like every lesson. So you'd have to struggle through this. Oh, look at this right here. So you got no smoking right here, and then smoking right next to no smoking. This is Japan. This is Japan, man. No smoking sign, smoking. Kinenbasho, smoking. It's hilarious, man. Right here, and this is the kids' park too. Koen, in the middle of some kids' park here. Smoking. Great. Really nice. Kodomo no koen, demo kare wa mada smoking suru. Kore wa Nihon desu. Anyway, so just an example there of how I always say people smoke in no smoking areas. It's just really offensive to me, especially in a kid's park. You know, you got little kids playing here. Don't want to get too off topic. So it just makes me angry. And the fact that I have to smell it now right next to where it says no smoking right there. So at least he'll be on YouTube and everybody can see. But I'm trying to like settle my anger here. My anger is like rising in me right here because I'm like smelling this smoke and shit like right next to where it says no smoking. Let me see if I'll just ask him. I'll ask him. それは記念場所でしょ? それは言ってでしょ? 記念場所. どうしてスモーキングする? これは子供の公園でしょ? そこで保育園. If you can understand what I just said, you know, my Japanese is bad, it's not very good, but I said, you see that sign, it says no smoking, and he was like, oh yeah. And I was like, so, also this is a kid's park. Now I can let my anger settle back down. You get to watch that now on YouTube, that's great, man. That's great. I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I did that and got it on camera. I'm feeling much better now. And I said also right next to this park is a kids hoikuen, which means a kids like preschool. And yeah, he left. Okay, I'm over it, guys. I'm over it. Sorry. All right, but come on, man. It's a kids park, man. It's a kids park. All right, like, you know I watch little kids come out here and play every day. All right, I don't want cigarette butts all over the park. I don't want them picking up stuff like that. So anyway. Finished up with all my students. All right, we're gonna switch over to talking about some of the teachers. Some of the teachers that I worked with they were all pretty cool people in general, and so they had some stories themselves. Like they had stories like I told you about my crazy roommates that lived next to me, and they all had kind of some stories like that too. For example, there was Josh, who lived with a roommate, and again, they didn't choose these roommates. Please understand, Nova chose their roommates for them. So if you're like, well, why did they choose to live with that idiot? They didn't choose to live with that idiot. He lived with this guy who was depressed about living in Japan, and I can understand. I see that happen sometimes. Sometimes people get depressed about living in Japan. You know, culture shock, homesickness. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not, you know, mocking anybody who feels that. I had it myself for a few months at one point in my like second year here in Japan, but it happens. It's something that happens, and to combat it though, this guy I think went about it the wrong way. He was pretty much drinking around the clock. He became like a full-time alcoholic, and he was still going to work and everything and showing up to his job, but apparently like his condition worsened. Like he was already on some kind of medication that you're not supposed to drink with, like what do you call it? Like, I don't want to say mental medication. That sounds really bad. That sounds like not PC. I always worry about this kind of stuff when I talk. Like, who am I offending? I'm never trying to go out of my way to offend anybody the way I say stuff. But if I don't know the proper, I don't know, the proper vocabulary, then perhaps I do it sometimes. the proper, oh, okay, how about psychiatric medication, right? Because psychiatrist is the one who prescribes you medication for things affecting you in a mental way. So he was prescribed this stuff that he wasn't supposed to drink with it. I don't know exactly what it was. It could be, I think, antidepressant. It was either like yeah, I think it was. It was like antidepressive stuff, antidepressives, and antidepressants. There we go. That's the word we're looking for, Scott. Sorry, I'm still a bit flustered. I'm still like getting my story flow back. And he was prescribed this stuff, and he was taking that along with his alcohol. He was literally drinking. I don't know if you guys know this exists in Japan, but there's sake, right? Of course, and by sake you can mean all alcohol, but you can actually mean sake, which is like fermented rice. You can buy it in massive bottles. Like it's not like America where like you've got like, you know, like this tall of a vodka bottle. Like you can buy like sake bottles that are like massive, that are like 2 gallons or something. They're just huge. They're insane. And apparently he bought one of these and bought like a huge thing of orange juice and just mixed them together. Now I've never tried to mix orange juice and sake. I don't really think that's a good combination to mix. You know, someone message it in the comments below and let me know if that's a good, you know, sort of screwdriver-esque type situation. But last time I checked, vodka was the only thing that seemed to really mix well. Maybe you could mix gin, I don't know. But he would do this every day and drink this, and apparently he was like drunk on this like non-stop. And he lived with one of the other teachers I worked with, Josh, and was just like wasted non-stop, and like never took a shower, never cleaned his room. And I remember Josh coming into work each day and being like, oh my god, like his futon is just like soaked with like human sweat and like just human byproduct, and just, you know, like sometimes he'd get too drunk and throw up, or get too drunk and piss himself. And like he just said he like lived with this guy who was like wretchedly stinky, and like he'd be like, you know, dude, you need to like, if you're like hurting this much, you need to go home. He said the guy's like, no, I'm okay, man. Like he never acted like he was like, oh, I'm so depressed, I want to go home. He said the guy was always like, no, I'm cool, whatever, you know, like. And he would like, on his time off, he would just like listen to a Discman, which he must have been like the last person on earth who had a Discman, and walk around all different parts of Japan drinking sake and orange juice, just like non-stop. And he said the guy was just like non-stop, constantly wasted, constantly like passing out all over. Like he said one time he came home and he had left the door unlocked, because in Japan it's not as big of a deal to leave your door unlocked. And the guy was passed out in front of their apartment. He hadn't even made it inside. And he's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why are you sleeping in front of the apartment? He's like, oh, bro, I forgot my key, so I couldn't get back in. He's like, did you try the door? Because look, it's been open the whole time. And he opened it. And so he moved out. I eventually actually moved in with this guy, Josh, and I've got another story about that. I should put that into my next whatever ramble, my next third part of this story, okay? Because that happens after Nova finally crashes and goes under. And I end up living with Josh, and Josh was like this like super hygienic freak. Like, I mean, he wanted things to be cleaned on a level. Like, I like to stay clean. You've seen the background, my house and everything. I keep my place pretty clean, but he had it on a different level. Like, and I'll explain that in a future ramble. So he had that guy. That was one story of a teacher who lived with another crazy roommate. And then Dave, a guy who I've talked about before too, he had a roommate who was also super depressed. And the guy was like depressed and not showing up to work on time every day. So like for like 29 days in a row, he like showed up late to work, and he was really surprised when he got fired. He was like, what? I can't believe they fired me. I'm in Japan. I don't have like any safety net. And it's like, well, yeah, even more of a reason to show up to work on time, right? Like, yeah, you'll get fired even in another country where, yeah, your parents aren't there to take care of you. I mean, why should they keep someone who's constantly showing up late? Nova treated us like shit, but that didn't mean you needed to show up late every day. So he got fired, and like Dave said, constantly this guy would like talk about like committing suicide and jumping off a Hitachi tower, which is like a tall tower down in Dobutsu-en-mai. And so finally like Dave had to like call this guy's parents, and this guy's parents had to come to Japan and pick him up and take him back and stuff. And he said like he had to like pretty much, you know, like nurse this guy back to being not a hermit, so that he would exit the house, meet his parents, and head back on a plane back to his country. So, and that, you know, like no one that's not what Dave was trained to do. Like, you know, he doesn't have any kind of certification that helps him treat any kind of mental illness, and that's obviously what the situation he was put into. Like, he called his company and was like, look, the guy's like not leaving the apartment, he's not going to meet his parents, and like, they're like, well, we already fired him, he's supposed to be moved out, and he's not supposed to even be in our apartments anymore. And just like, Jesus Christ, man, like, you know, like, you bring people over there, and then if things go wrong, you're just like, oh well, not our problem anymore. I mean, you know, to a certain extent, like, they had every right to fire him for not showing up for 29 days. But if you're constantly going to be bringing people over to a country in this mass, in this big of a mass, like this many teachers, I mean, you got to think about certain things like this are going to happen. Like, I remember I heard one story one time. I think, okay, it was from my friend Steve, who I worked with at Nova too. And he worked in the JET program first, like my Argonauts did, another J-vlogger you can check out if you're interested in the JET program. I've never worked the JET program, don't ask me JET questions. And the JET program is a government program that brings teachers over to Japan, and it's similar to Nova only in that aspect. It brings teachers over to Japan. It treats them much better, it pays them much better. It gives them an apartment for free, and it takes them around to like different festivals, matsuris, and all different types of cultural stuff to get them, you know, into Japan and understanding the area they live in. They do a pretty good job, honestly. Anyone who I've ever talked to who's ever worked for the JET program run by the government has had a great time, been treated well, and taken really well cared of. One time, Steve said when he first started, one of the girls that they brought over with him, like, barricaded herself into her apartment and refused to come out, refused to work her job. I think from the second she got there in the airport, she already got freaked out by Japan, and locked herself into her apartment, wouldn't come out. And now, you guys are probably thinking, like, what a freak, like, why would someone suddenly do that? But like, sometimes when, and this girl is a blonde girl, I'd heard, sometimes, and I don't have any excuse for why this happens, I don't, you know, want to try and explain this away, but it does happen, okay? A lot of blonde girls in Japan are approached by Japanese men, like businessmen, salarymen, and they tend to like ask them, like, are you a prostitute, are you a Russian prostitute? Like, a lot of Russian prostitutes who are blonde come over here, and they try to like even give them money. Like, you've probably seen it in the Wolverine movie, Wolverine Samurai, where that one character, she's a blonde woman who has like some kind of snake power or something. She's not Lady Deathstrike, is she? Well, maybe she is. Anyway, I can't remember the movie well enough right now. But that guy keeps being like, how much for sex and stuff, and she kills him. Well, that's like really real. Like, they got that part of the movie really right. That happens to blonde women all the time in Japan. I can't tell you how many blonde women have told me stories of either being accosted, like assaulted, like asked for how much money like they cost and stuff, just because they're literally blonde, and that's it. Like, a lot of stuff is assumed. So I'm guessing something like that happened to her at the airport already. So I don't know if that definitely happened, but I think she was probably approached in a way that made her very uncomfortable. In the airport, probably no one sexually assaulted her in the airport. There's like a million cameras in Japan, especially in the airport, so that probably would have been stopped. But I'm sure she was made to feel uncomfortable, let's put it that way. And she barricaded herself, and you know, the JET program had to bring her parents over here to talk her out of her apartment to get her to go back home. And didn't ask for any money back or anything. Like, I mean, they had spent a ton getting her over here, paid for her apartment, you know, already paid the key money on the apartment, like, you know, and she was so freaked out by her first visit to Japan, didn't even get to teach a single day and went home. Whereas in Nova, like, they fire you, that was it. Like, you're out on the street, and then go find another job. So you can see the very different black and white variation in how different companies can take care of you sometimes in Japan. And I guess, you know what, the government's not really a company, it's the government, right? But whatever. So that was some of the crazy situations that happen with teachers and students and roommates that they had in Japan. When we first got here, this is like the second week. All these stories happen already by the second week. We had already had these crazy people, these crazy teachers, these crazy students. I'd already switched to night shift, which was really easy to switch to. They needed a ton of people for that, and they never had enough. And we're reaching about 40 minutes now. This video went a little bit longer than usual because I had to kind of get myself back into story mode after yelling at that guy for smoking in a kid's park. Sorry if any of you are offended by that, but that's something I really have a personal vendetta against. I do not like people smoking in no smoking areas, especially where kids are. Mostly because I myself have 2 kids who play, and they have played in this park before. I have brought them out to my job and let them play here, and I do not like them picking up cigarette butts. nor being exposed to carcinogens. So I apologize to any of those who are annoyed that the story stopped halfway through, though. You know, that is kind of sucky. But you can see, like, even the guy left, like this is what this guy did. He left his, can you see it here? I don't know. Yeah, there, right there, on the ground, right? Yeah. Oh. He left, I don't know how well you can see it, but he left, like, his smoking package. He left the plastic from his package. He left his match that he used. He left the match pack underneath. You can't see it. And he was probably going to throw down his cigarette after he was done. That's like the only thing people consume that they throw into the ground when they're done. You see anybody like drink a soda can and throw it on the ground, step on it and walk away? You notice the only thing people do that with is cigarettes. It's the only like consumer product that people are using while they're walking. When they finish it, they throw it on the ground and think, that's cool, whatever, I'm done. Dirty, man, dirty. You know, nothing wrong with anybody who smokes. Just smoke in the right areas. Use an ashtray. Clean up after yourself. Come on, man. We do it with every product we use. You can do it with every product you use. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. That was the second week of my life here in Japan. Crazy teachers, students, and more. If you like what you saw here today, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I am Unrested. This has been another long ramble, week 2 of my first month in Japan. I think I'm just going to go through the whole first month and the collapse of Nova. You're going to get to hear how they go bankrupt and disappear into nothingness, and which happens to the students and teachers who are left to struggle for lessons, jobs, and survival in Japan. And that will start next week with week 3 of my continuing story. Well, or maybe, I don't know, I might do it later in this week. I might not make you wait an entire another week for the next part of this story. Let me know what you thought of this story today. Did you enjoy what you saw here today? Do you want me to continue this story? I got an awesome positive response from the first story, and if I get that from this one too, then I will continue. Until next time, have a good one.